Recorded Flash Voice.
録音の肉声はアートとテクノロジーの地平を歩くポッドキャストです。発展を続けるテクノロジーと変化を続ける人間の社会、創造性、哲学でも別にそんな難しい話じゃないかもしれません。編集者佐野和也とアーティスト岡美幸が時折ゲストを迎えながらおしゃべりします。ということで今回のゲストは、山口県山口市にある、山口情報芸術センター YCAM のキュレーター、レオナルド・バルトロメウスさんにお話をお伺いします。バルトさんよろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
ありがとうございます。バルトさんはこの間山口で初めてお会いしたんですけど、すごく陽気なお兄さんだな
そんなに
山口を楽しんでらっしゃるような方だなと思って素敵だなと思ってますちょっとじゃあバルトさんの紹介をまずしたいと思います。バルトさんは1987年生まれ、山口情報芸術センター YCAM のキュレーター、ジャカルタ芸術大学を卒業後、2012年にルアンルパ後のグッドスクールエコシステムに参加。近年のキュレーションプロジェクトではオープンエデュケーションとコラボレーションプロジェクトに焦点を当てている。2017年ジャカルタ、スマラン、スラバヤの数人のキュレーターとともにキュレーション集団 KKK、コレクティブキュレーター、カンプン、アーバンプアキュレーターを結成。このほか現在も海外でのインディペンデントリサーチやコラボレーションプロジェクトを情熱的に行っている。はい、ということでバルトさんすごく日本語が上手な方ですけど、いろいろお話をお伺いしていくと英語の方が多分お話ししやすいところいろいろあるかなと思うので、ちょっと英語でお話今日はしていけたらと思ってますのでよろしくお願いします。
はい、お願いします。
お願いします。Today we want to talk about the exhibition of the YCAM Project MRT, and I let's say the event I joined that was YCAM Open Lab 2025, and yeah. And Barto-san have a theme about open education. So yeah, we'd like to ask about the open education and about the exhibition and yeah, and your activity around the open education and such kind of theme. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. At first, Bart-san in YCAM, when started to work in YCAM, how long have you been working in YCAM?
I joined YCAM maybe in 2019, so around like already 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I joined them like around summertime, from 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So it's already a bit long, but I think because there's a COVID like pandemic situation happened right after that. I feel I just work like very briefly at YCAM.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it doesn't feel that long.
Mm.
But because also maybe I think living in smaller city like Yamaguchi, it like time feels like a bit longer compared to like if you live in bigger cities like Tokyo or Osaka.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So it's almost 6 years.
6 years. Before that, did you live in Japan?
Before that, no, actually, I think this is my first experience working and living in Japan. But my first trip our first visit to Japan is in 2014. So I was joining Hiroshima Gendai Bijutsukan.
うんうん。
広島市現代美術館か。
うんうん。
広島現美という。
うんうん。
So I was invited by the former chief curator at Hiroshima Genbi, Kamiya Yukie-san.
うんうん。
So Kamiya-san invited me to work as internship for like the curatorial department.
うん
So I stay in Hiroshima for maybe 1.5 months or 2 months. I don't really
う
remember.
んうん。
So then after Hiroshima, then I think almost every year I have a project in Japan, whether it's with my collective Ruang Rupa or my personal research. So yeah, I think the relationship it's already started since 2014, but
うんうん。
yeah, I don't have like the tiniest dream at all, like that I could work in a Japanese public art institution. So yeah, working at YCAM came as quite a surprise for me as well.
うーん。Why could you join the YCAM? Why did you join the YCAM?
なんでだろう I'm not really, but I know some people. Like I have some friends that already working at YCAM. So during my how do you call it? My other visits, like I visit YCAM couple of time, and I know some people that already working there.
うんうん。
But I don't think people from outside has idea that foreigners can work in a public art institution in Japan. I think it's very rare, kind of like
Yeah.
Yeah,
image.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, I think you might have better imagination, like for like Triennale or like Biennale, like things like festival or like temporary working style.
うんうん。
So I was informed by one of my colleague at YCAM at that time that YCAM is it's actually a bit funny because he asked me like, do you want to collaborate? Do you want to work together with YCAM? And then my imagination at that time is more like a collaboration. So like I work with Ruang Rupa with my collective,
うんうん。
and YCAM wants to collaborate with us. So then I was just like, yeah, sure, let's work together. And what I didn't know is like the offer is actually for an in-house curator. So
Yeah.
so when I apply, I have no idea that I was going to stay here for like quite such a long time.
うんうん。
But then again, I think because I don't have any expectation, it makes me like much flexible to understand what kind of things that I should do or like what kind of program that I should develop instead of like as like you like looking at YCAM as one of the goals for my career, for example. So yeah, I think every time people asking me like I couldn't really tell what was the actual reason. It's just like because YCAM accept my application and I was working there. It's as simple as that. Like, I don't have any conceptual story behind it. Yeah, but I think I should say that having friends in the institution at YCAM it makes me feel comfortable to working there. So for me that's maybe my biggest motivation at the time.
Do you think they were looking for someone who can work as a curator, but at the same time as like an open educator, so that maybe they choose you?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. Because also, yeah, I don't really remember that. But maybe that could be one thing. But I think it's also kind of it's a bit risky, I think, because you invite a foreigner who cannot speak the language, like you cannot speak Japanese fluently, or even like I couldn't say fluently, I couldn't speak Japanese at all at the beginning. So I think it's a kind of like a 50-50 situation, both for us, either for YCAM or for me. It's kind of like so, because I remember in the interview, I think one of the interviewer like asking me a question, something like, are you going to be feeling comfortable working in a Japanese only, like Japanese language only environment? I didn't answer that. I asked them back. I was like, are you going to be comfortable working with someone who cannot speak Japanese at all? So I think it's kind of like a fair exchange. I was like, okay, let's see what will happen after that. But yeah, I don't think there's a particular idea behind it so far as I know. But I think some of the people that working at YCAM, some of the staff, they already know like what kind of projects that I often did in Jakarta, in Indonesia, or in other places. And yeah, maybe that could be one guess. It's not like a curator, institutional curator, but something that have a bit more in between. That could be.
Yeah.
Could be a good guess, maybe. I still don't know until now.
Thank you. And about this exhibition, Project MRT, how many years have you been working? I heard that the YCAM project often have 1 year or 2 years or even more. But how long have you working about this exhibition?
For MRT, I think the actual work for the exhibition, I think it's around 2 years. But I think the initial idea, I think it started like way back before. So I think the first time I met Oron Katz, one of the artists, is actually in 2019 when YCAM, we are doing another version of the Open Lab with a similar theme of, I think it's about bio, I forget, Namamono Atsukai Kata, something like, how do you understand living culture or something like that? That's the English translation. Oron was there for a short session, like maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes lecture. But I was quite impressed with how he presented his perspective about this bioart, because usually when you talk about bioarts nowadays, it's often like really close to like sculptural things, like it's more like presentation based on the concept and the medium. But when I hear Oron's stories, I think I felt like there's a lot of social critics coming from him, perhaps also like because of his practice throughout this like maybe 2 or 3 decades, like 30 years working in the fields. So then I started to feeling like, oh, maybe if there's a chance, I would like to work with him to do something at YCAM. But again, it was initial idea, and then I did this project called Shoku-to-Rinri. It's a 3 years program, but I worked with an artist group from Indonesia called Bakudapan Food Study Group, to kind of like researching and kind of presenting the context of agricultural violence during the Japanese occupation in Indonesia, and also what happened nowadays. So it's become like questioning like how our food production is now being a new battleground for this, capitalist company, which kind of similar to what happened during the colonial period. So from that point, I think I share about that exhibition with Oron. Of course, it's not about bio art, but we kind of like sharing the similar interests. So then he actually told me like, oh, actually, I'm doing another project right now called in Perth. And then at some point he visit YCAM again, and then we kind of like developed the idea in 2022. So then it's kind of like from that point onwards, we kept like exchanging conversations, like how we can do the projects together. So yeah, I think it's kind of like a bit long journey to make this project happen. Especially, I think I also need to build my confidence, because this is something that I never touched before, like the field itself, like bio arts. So then I need to have a lot of conversation with him, with Ionat Zur, like his partner, and also the collaborators for this exhibition as well, just to get the understanding. What are we talking about when we're discussing about bio arts? Is it something that, sci-fi kind of things, or it could be like something that can be, openly discussed with the general public? So I think that's how the project started. So maybe around officially, maybe from 2022, we start the conversation.
I saw this exhibition, Project MRT. It was really, interesting. Composition. Yes, it's many. Looks like love, practice, not 実験ってなんて言うんだ experiment experimental things, and it's you can see the connection of the each experimental things. And we can see them, and we can experience the each experiment, and how connected to the other experiment, and it's all of them. It's one
circle,
cycle,
cycle,
kind of one cycle. Yes, it's accurate. It's really interesting, and it's not just exhibition, but kind of experience to and learning the bio by one of the calculation. It's and I after that I hear that Barto-san focusing on the open education and collaboration, and I understand what you wanted to do. It was really easy to understand to run in one of the open education project.
So the exhibition itself is like working as a like open education program.
Yes, looks like I after that I understand about the open education, the team of open education. So, how did you compose the exhibition? This exhibition?
難しい。
Yeah. How?
Yeah.
What talk? What
Yeah.
you discussed and how composed the exhibition?
Yeah. I think again, I think it's related with how I like myself. Like I don't have much confidence at the beginning to do this project because bioarts is something that a bit far, I think, from my interests. But I think through talking with Oron and Ionat and also Steve Berrick, who like the third collaborator, I think I could sense that the main idea is not to showcasing like the technology of the bioart itself. It's become a big question mark about what kind of future that we want to approach. So, and I think it's also kind of like related because I explained to them like, oh, this is how I do the other projects, and I'm more focusing on how to use the exhibition as a learning platform. So then, it's not just like one way of receiving, because usually like you come and then you see the artworks, everything is just like the okyaku-san, the visitor, they just, how do you call, contemplate by themselves, and then that's all, like it's finished. I said like I don't like that style. I mean, it's not wrong, of course, but I like something that a bit more like conversational.
Yeah.
So I always try to maintain that kind of communication style. So people needs to kind of like intrigue, people needs to kind of like, what is this, what is that, and then you have to have conversation. So then we had that idea to kind of like, okay, maybe that's how we can present the exhibition, perhaps something that looks like a laboratory or like a small factory kind of things. But of course, in order to engage with the local visitor, let's say that's the most number of guests that we had in Yamaguchi, obviously. We want to bring something local into the exhibition. And I think that's also like what Oron and the projects that he did in Perth is trying to do, is kind of like how to create like an exhibition that can be implemented in different places. But every time you go, you use their local resource to kind of like to build up the exhibition context. So we kind of like, okay, let's do some research to kind of like understand how this conversation developed in Japan. And the other thing is the original idea of this project, when he did in Perth in 2022, it's actually a bit more like sarcasm. So I'm not sure if Hiniku is kind of similar feeling towards that, but we found out it's really difficult to translate that jokes, the black jokes, the dark humor for Japanese audience context, because I think usually like you always have like these two options, no, A or B, like black or white. You have to choose. Like there's very rare case you have an in between, like kind of, and then to be able, let's say, to laugh to jokes about our dark future, it's really something that maybe it's not really visible in Japan in general. So that's kind of like, I think we developed the composition during the research. Like we went to several bio institute, we went to several companies, we went to several like farming company or farming industry in Yamaguchi and some other cities in Japan, and we kind of picking up like the elements that kind of like create the feelings. And that's also kind of like the idea how we kind of like put the elements like all together in the space, and to give people like a feeling of like this is how a future that might be look like. But at the same time, it's also like it's not like very far away. It's not like something like 200 years later technology. It's something that really close from our present situation. So that's why we kind of trying to arranging it in that kind of like laboratory factory kind of things. And the other influences, I think, when we went to see the Banpaku, the expo in Osaka, which is kind of interesting because they talk almost about the similar idea with the project, with what we were trying to say in the project.
In the future. Yeah, by your art. Yeah.
And then the most surprising part is actually when we visiting the Japanese pavilion, where actually the main goal of that pavilion is to introduce the recent development of Japan's agricultural technology, which is trying to utilizing algae more. Algae, the green thing, as a renewable, as a new alternative of energy and also food. And then the final goal is to go to Mars using algae as a fuel. And it's so interesting because Oron told me that in Australia right now, algae has become the biggest problem in their ocean because it's covered the entire surface and it's create like a lot of issue because it changed the water, how do you call, like pH level. So then there's less fish, and then it changed the whole ecosystem of the ocean. So we kind of like, this is very interesting. So then people already understand that this idea exists. It just like it was being showcased in a more positive lights in some sort of way through the Banpaku. So then we think like, okay, maybe we can borrow that sense, the atmosphere, but let's make it like a bit more analog. So then, there's a human involvement in that. There's people that still works. So you don't feel like it's too far away from what happened nowadays. So yeah, I think it's kind of like an interesting, like, how do you call it, like process to not only making an exhibition, but also to understand how to translate cultural differences.
Very true.
Because I think for Australian people, they quite aware that this is a problem that they are facing right now, which is, because Australia is one of the world biggest exporter for like a lot of like meat industry, dairy industry, and also like, fruits and something related with like big plantation. But I think in Japan, it's not that common to understand that there's a danger around the food industry, which is again very interesting. When we actually met with the farmers, everyone is kind of like, oh yeah, we are totally agree with your idea. Like this is what will happen. We might have this trouble. We might have this challenge. And it's kind of like giving you a different sense of illusion that the companies that trying to make this situation happen, it's the same company that probably like controlling the seeds industry, the whole like monopoly of where the food should goes, etc. So yeah, I think it's I really enjoyed the process, how the exhibitions develop from idea to the space.
Yeah, it's at first it's let's say it looks like a future lab, but see it carefully. It's apparently, let's say, ineffective. Let's say, for example, the huge the make the 38-degree make the let's say
セル細胞
細胞、セルを培養する、ために、38 degrees to make 38 degrees and make huge compost. It was apparently ineffective, but yeah, it's kind of 皮肉. Yeah, you said that it's it's kind of open education. I thought about that. Yes.
Yeah. When I heard about the story of algae in Japan and Australia, that's also a kind of like, yeah, if, for example, like Australian country export algae to Japan and then eat algae in Japan or make it, yeah, fuel from them, yeah, it's going to be a good solution, but it's not like that, right? So, yeah, that's also a kind of sarcasm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people knows already like the kind of situation. I mean people might aware that there's a climate change, there's environmental crisis and so on and so forth. But I think people often did not experience that as a conversations, like it just like happens, like okay, this happens. So it's always like individually basis experience. So I think through this exhibition that there's a lot of like things that we try to convey in a sense with all of this kind of like unnecessary elements of technology, but it looks cool. So then it's interesting. Like if you just come to see the show, that everything looks like wow, this is like psycho, like super high tech, and then you see like all these elements of like productions, distributions, and then whatever that exists in the space. You see the strawberry being grown using fog, which looks cool to the eye, right? You see the steam like everywhere. But then once you understand the whole story, it's become like kind of like Sano-san said, like it's like a question mark. It's like how the technology itself, it's very ineffective to develop, and that's probably the biggest problem that we had. It's not about the technology itself, but who used the technology. Because, I mean, the idea of using algae as an alternative solution is not bad. It's one way to solve like the problem maybe. But I think the danger is always like once the capitalism, like companies or like industry, like smells that, you can imagine like maybe we will have like algae instead of solving a problem. It's become like a new way of like economy, and then we will have another set of problems that happening because we keep like growing algae here and there. So that's always the case. Like the questions that we try to bring. It's not about saying that no to technology or no to data usage, but then again, how aware we are about who will use the technology, who owns the technology, and then how our life will be completely changed based on that.
It's just a few weeks from the exhibition starts, but how do you feel about the let's say the exhibition, and how what do you get some reaction from the business?
yeah, it's I think we are almost fail. No,
Okay.
because everything went so well. That's
It's so well.
Great.
because again, this is like the sarcasm, because I think Oron and me we're expecting like there's a lot of failure happen, like fail crops, like oh the ichigo will die, the plants will die, things that are not working, because that's what we want to tell about the failure of a system, right?
Yeah.
But so far everything went so smooth. I was very frustrated
Oh,
because then it changed how people how the audience see the exhibitions, right? Because they kept saying like, oh, okay, this is not a bad technology, like maybe we can continue. So I was thinking like maybe I should do something, put some
Poison.
like poison into no, but yeah, I think so far it's an interesting. We had an interesting conversation with a lot of the visitors. Because mainly, like again, people who live in Yamaguchi who came to the space often, they also did farming themselves, so they know a lot about problems that exist within the farming industry in Japan, like who control the seeds, what kind of fertilizer that people need to use, and then they kind of like really enjoying like having that conversation to understand there is a possibilities in the future, that you can actually have a closed loop cycle in one space. Like, everything can just like, sort it out by themselves. Like if the plants die, it goes to the compost goes to the other parts, blah, blah, blah. And then everything was sorted out. So then the education team at YCAM, for example, we did like a few workshops to kind of like engage with the visitors, giving them a tour, to kind of like telling the stories. And one of the interesting moment was like I explained the whole things about the elements, the installation, the idea here and there. And then we went up to the stairs, to the control room area, where there's a bunch of monitors with very cool visual, but you cannot really understand about it, right? So then I explained about the whole things, and then usually they were kind of like asking me a question. Oh, like I have a comment. I was like, yeah, this is a very interesting exhibition, blah blah blah. But now I understand, like this is the artwork. Like they pointing out to the monitors. So, and I was like, no, like the whole exhibition is the artwork. It's one installation.
yeah.
Then they kind of like, no. The one in the foyer, in the first floor, it's we know already. It's a agricultural technology.
Mhm.
We know like plants, blah blah blah. And then they kind of like, this one, we don't understand what is this. So this is the artwork. So I was like, okay, it's very interesting, like because they don't understand what is that, and then it suddenly become an artwork. So then there's an interesting like exchange, like what you consider as an artwork and what is not, because they completely understand about the plants, about the strawberry compost whatsoever. So for them it's not artwork, it's something that happens in their daily life.
Mhm.
Then they see the monitors, they kind of like, yeah, this is definitely an artwork. And then you see like the cool colors, they kind of like, this is very YCAM, like
Yeah.
so many monitors
Yeah.
have no idea about whatever inside.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So yeah, I think, and then some people it's really curious to see how it connected. For example, how each element is kind of like interdependent to each other. Let's say, and then yeah, I think so far people really enjoy. I think it's also kind of like a bit rare situation to see like ikimono, like living things inside an art institution, because usually you always encounter a product, like let's say a paintings, a sculptures, or monitors in case of YCAM. But then this time you see like strawberry, you see hanakori, you see compost with a lot of wood chips. So it might give a different feelings to the audience as well. In that case, so
I never see the water spreading in the gallery.
very DIY shrimp farming.
Yes, shrimp farming.
but yeah, I think it's also the juxtaposition, the placement of like the elements that shouldn't be in an institution. Now it's inside. It creates like a different tension for them, for the audience. But yeah, I think we need to make it a bit more sad in some way. now the aura is the atmosphere is very positive. Like people come like, oh yeah, this cool. It's like we can work with this technology in the future.
It's still have a few, some months at the end. What is your challenge for the rest of the term?
I think right now the main challenge that we have right now is to maintain the temperature inside the incubator for the cell, because I think now the air become quite dry, so then the compost is losing its power. It's not generating enough heat, so we try to reheating it, like putting some water, maybe like putting some like fresh how do you call it, fresh waste, so like fruits or vegetables to restart the bacteria activity. And I think the rest, I think in general it's just like maintaining the plants itself. But we had a lot of help from like Yamaguchi University agricultural department to maintain like the plants. And yeah, so we'll try to see how it runs like in winter setting, whether we need to do some adjustment to keep the plants alive, but also maybe we want to have a bit more public programs, so then more people can interact and then engage in the conversation that we try to raise in this exhibition. But yeah, so far it's mainly about caring for the living materials in the exhibition space. Again, that probably like the challenge that we will need to tackle until the end of the exhibition.
Do you think is that a part of the exhibition, like the program, the show, like the performance of like caring the plants?
Yeah. I think it was because I think Oron was putting this sentences called he called this project as a durational experiment. Durational performative experiment. So then, of course, like it's not easy to translate into Japanese, because it's almost like things that he founding out. So then I asked him like, what do you mean when you using this word? Kind of like, well, it's an exhibition, so it's durational. There's a time limit, so like let's say 4 months. But it's also like a performative. There's a lot of performative element onto it, in terms not as like people came and do performance art, but then like what you said, it's about caring, it's about maintaining, because then you cannot wait until the exhibition close to do the maintenance. If you see the plans like not going well, you need to right away like intervene, like, oh, maybe we should cut off the mist, or like we should change the water, and so on and so forth, or like we have to adjust the light. So then he said like that's kind of like the performativity of the project itself. It's not like you put you put the object, and then you went back home to your country, things will stay the same. It's not. It's always, there's always a problem. Like the cell temperature is dropping, so we need to keep checking whether they're still alive or not. And it's an experiment, so it might fail, it might successful. Luckily for us, this time it's a bit more on the successful side, compared to when he did in Perth. It's more to the failure side instead of the successful one. But yeah, I think that's also the elements that we learn through the process. It's very interesting. For example, we did experiments like before the exhibition opened, maybe like 3 months before or 4 months before, like to raise some fish to testing out whether the system that we will use is going to work or not. It's a complete failure. It's just like all the fishes die in about like 2 months. Not even 2 months, maybe 1.5 months. And then it's really shocking, I should say, even for me. Because usually when you're doing like a production for an exhibition, like you're dealing with something that always within our control as human, right? I mean, there could be like a computational problem. Let's say you put the wrong coding and then the visual just went wrong. This time, like, you have no idea, like, why do they die? And then we try to understand, like, maybe we put a different how do you call it, like esa, like the fish meal, or like there's something, there's a bacteria, but we cannot find by the end of it. So then we call the person who gave us the fish, who work as an expert in the office in Yamaguchi Prefecture, and we just say like, oh, we are really sorry because all the fish is now die, and then I think we failed. And he just replied in a very simple word. He said like, yeah, it's okay. That's the price that you have to pay if you want to learn about living things. And he said to us like, maybe I have killed like more than 100,000 fish in my life, in order to understand like how to grow them, how to sustain their life in an outside their normal habitat. And then that's also the same reaction that we get to the other, like not only from the fishermen, but also like from the farmers, because we said like, oh, there's something strange happening with the ichigo, with the strawberry. What happened? Like, what should we do? Like, do you have any kind of like, I don't know, because the plants, they will react differently if they move to different environment, and then it's your job, it's our job to figuring out what happens there. And then even if we fail by the end of it, like every plant is die, and then we just not successful at all, we still learn something about it. So then you have a very different standpoint of how you're dealing with living materials. From us, like from let's say from YCAM, or like from our YCAM staff point of view, we're seeing it as an exhibition material, right? So we want to make it perfect. We want them to alive, to to look genki whatsoever, and everything should be nice because it's an art exhibition. But from their point of view, it's completely different. They're really interested to help us because they felt like this is something that people, the younger generation should have done, which is just try to do it by yourself, so you can understand what actually happened. And I just felt like this is a very interesting lessons that we get in this exhibition, because now you have a different sensibility towards living materials. Like you don't take anything for granted, and then now we care the plants, the cell, the fish, in a way we care for like ourselves instead of like caring for like an art object. So yeah, it's an unexpected labor that happened in this exhibition, but in the same way it helped us to understand more the big questions that we want to ask in this exhibition. So yeah.
Before this talk, we talk about the bio art, and at that time we talk about the let's say uncertainness about the let's say around bio art, or even using the life as a art material. It's quite difficult, but it's quite kind of interesting, and we cannot let's say we never see the possibility of the life as a art material. Yeah, we talked about it is the point of the one of the point of the bio art. Yeah, but yeah, I heard that you what you said. Yeah, it is the same point about the bio art. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be kind of like my curatorial approach is always about uncertainty. I mean, that's also kind of like why I kind of really interested with open education, because I think I try to like move away from like the usual structure of our education system. So then everyone could be teacher, everyone could be student, and then you just like open to any possible way to learn things. And then I think uncertainty is always part of it. And well, maybe I shouldn't say it, but you're kind of like a museum or like art institution. Sometimes it's over explained. It's it's too educational in a sense. Like you always try to give the audience like the right answers.
Yeah, everything is answer. Yeah.
Yeah, everything should have an answer. But most of my projects, it's a problem, of course, like for me in Yamaguchi as well, because people not really get used to this kind of style. But I always try to create like this gray area where you just don't know what will happen. And then that's the interesting part of it for me. Like that's part of life. I don't think life will be interesting if you know what will happen like tomorrow or like 1 week after this. And then that's also kind of like, maybe that's the similarities that I get from Oron and Ionat, because they're really embracing this idea of like, it's okay to get disappointed sometimes. You don't need to always like see beautiful things. You can see like things might die, things might not working in your way. And I think that's also the parts that I like from like bio arts, because well, pretty much you cannot control it exactly. If you're working with cell, you're working with bacteria, or you're working with any other living things, we can try to limit the risk of failure in some way, but you don't make it zero at all. Like there's always like a chance to kind of like why it's die, like have no idea at all.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to ask about your curation at the next episode. So yeah, and yeah, this time we could talk about your open education. Yeah, it was really thoughtful and really interesting for us. So yeah, let's talk about your curation and your what do you think about your curator career or something? Yes, let's talk at next episode. Yes, I finished this episode this time.
Okay.
Recorded Fresh Voice is produced and released with support from the Chishima Foundation for Creative Osaka. If there anything you'd like to hear about art and technology topics you want to Miyuki-san or Kazuya to tackle, or guests you'd love to us to invite, feel free to send message through the form in the show notes. We are also happy to read our comments on Spotify or YouTube. You can watch the show there as a video podcast. So please follow, subscribe, and give us a like if you enjoy it. We say the word at last, take care. So please say take care. It's at last. Okay. So see you next week. Take care.
Take care.
バイバイ。
ごきげんよう。
ごきげんよう。